Welcome, sleepy one. I'll be your storyteller tonight. Before we begin, please like and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And now, close your eyes. Let's begin. I remember that April evening in New Haven like it had been carved into my bones with a dull blade. My partner, Riley Vargas, and I were winding down our night shift when dispatch crackled through the radio. Unit 14, respond to the Maplewood Inn. Possible assault. Room 14. Female screaming. The voice on the other end didn't sound right. Tight, trembling, desperate. Dispatchers are trained to keep calm no matter what they hear. But this one sounded barely composed. The hairs on my arms lifted. The Maplewood Inn wasn't a place that drew attention. A squat, forgettable building tucked behind a half-dead shopping plaza. Its flickering neon sign buzzed through the drizzle. Vacancy. As we turned into the lot, I noticed only 2 cars parked near the far end. Fluorescent lights stuttered above us, their glow painting long, jaundiced streaks across the wet asphalt. Riley glanced at me as we stepped out. "You feel that?" "Yeah," I muttered, my hand already resting near my holster. Something's off. Room 14's door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of yellow light spilling across the concrete walkway. I drew my weapon, the metal cold and steady in my hand. Riley took position beside the door. "Police," I called, voice low but firm. "Ma'am, are you all right?" No answer, then a rustle inside. We pushed the door open. A woman sat trembling on the edge of the unmade bed, her nightgown rumpled, hair matted, eyes fixed on something we couldn't see. She looked mid-30s, maybe younger under the exhaustion. He shot me," she stammered, her voice paper-thin. "But he's still here. He's going to—" She froze. Her gaze darted to the dark corners of the room. I scanned quickly. No blood, no gun, no signs of a struggle. The air smelled of mildew and cheap air freshener. On the nightstand sat half-empty prescription bottles. Diane Garrett, one printed neatly on each label. "Ma'am," I said softly, lowering myself to eye level. "Who did this to you?" Her lips trembled. "He told me not to tell." Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Riley crouched beside her, speaking gently. "You're safe now, okay? No one's here." But the inconsistencies began to pile up. She couldn't recall her own phone number, her address, or even her family's names. When I asked for ID, she hesitated, her hands shaking. Riley checked the motel's guest log and froze. This says Diane Garrett checked in 2 nights ago. So?" I asked. He looked up, pale. "Diane Garrett's been dead for 6 years." I turned back toward her. Her breathing hitched. Her pupils dilated. My name isn't Diane," she whispered. "It's Carla Hendrick." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The air felt heavy, electric. Carla's story came out in broken, gasping fragments. She'd been abducted as a teenager by Diane Garrett's husband, Ronald Aum. For 6 years, he'd forced her to live as his dead wife, teaching her to mimic Diane's voice, her handwriting, even her laugh. Every photograph in that room, every folded blouse in the drawer, every document, carefully constructed lies. "He taught me everything," she said, trembling. "How to answer questions, how to smile the right way, how to cry on cue. Every day I practiced being someone I wasn't." Her voice cracked and I felt something cold twist in my gut. This wasn't just captivity, it was erasure. The room suddenly felt suffocating, like the walls themselves had been listening. I looked around again, more carefully this time, and found it. In the corner, behind a faded curtain, a small wardrobe. The latch was newer than the rest of the furniture. I tugged it open and saw fresh locks drilled into the wood. Riley exhaled beside me, voice low. Jesus Christ, she lived in here. And somehow the silence that followed was louder than any scream. Subtle gouges marred the wood paneling, faint but deliberate, hinting at years of forced confinement. Pages of a yellowed diary lay open, edges curled and stained, each line a meticulous record of Ronald's manipulations, a step-by-step blueprint of a predator's calculated mind. Carla's hands trembled as she traced the scrawled words, each sentence dredging up the terror she had lived daily. He told me if I ever told anyone, he'd find me, he'd make me disappear. Her voice wavered, eyes wide and haunted, and I believed him, every single day. It was hard to fathom the depth of control one human could impose over another, particularly over someone so young. Her fear wasn't confined to the present. It was a psychic imprint of 6 years of relentless domination, a conditioning that had eroded her trust in her own thoughts and memories. Riley and I dug deeper. Motel records, local archives, interviews with neighbors. Weeks earlier, Ronald Garrett had ended his own life in the basement of the very motel where he had kept Carla captive. The room she'd inhabited remained untouched in many ways, yet its walls carried the residue of her trauma. Even with Ronald gone, the echoes of fear lingered. Every creak in the HVAC, every flicker of shadow down the hall sent her pulse racing. We contacted her family in Pennsylvania. Their tears fell freely as they absorbed the story. A mixture of shock, anger, and a fragile relief that Carla had survived years of invisible torment. The reunion was a jarring collision of joy and sorrow, a moment where disbelief hung heavier than the hugs. Later that week, Carla confided in me quietly. Months on, she still felt the weight of Ronald Garrett's presence, as though the motel itself had absorbed him. The walls seemed unwilling to relinquish the control he had wielded over her. With careful deliberation, Carla agreed to return with us to the motel. She needed to see the space where she had been imprisoned, to reclaim the boundaries of her reality. The lobby smelled unchanged. Stale coffee, damp carpet, faintly bitter cleaning chemicals. As we entered room 14, she froze. It looks the same, she whispered. Every detail aligned perfectly with her memories. The wardrobe, the nightstand, even the worn, threadbare carpet. She edged toward the window, peering at the empty lot outside. I don't feel scared right now, she admitted, voice low, steadying herself. But it's still heavy, like he left a shadow that never fully lifts. We spent hours there, documenting evidence and gently guiding her through memories, separating her genuine recollections from the rehearsed responses Ronald had drilled into her. Piece by piece, she began reclaiming herself, identifying which thoughts, emotions, and habits were hers, and which had been imposed. By the end of the visit, Carla exhaled, a slow, deliberate release of air. "It's over," she said, though whether she truly believed it remained uncertain. I clung to hope that she could finally begin to heal. Carla returned to Pennsylvania, beginning therapy and reconnecting with the family she had been forced to forget. The motel remained behind her, a dark chapter of her life, but no longer a prison. Sometimes when I drive past quiet motels or deserted streets in New Haven, I think of her. The memory lingers, not merely of Ronald Garrett's cruelty, but of Carla's extraordinary resilience. She survived years of psychological captivity, navigating trauma so profound it is almost impossible to comprehend. She once told me, "I feel the shadow sometimes, but I'm learning it's not me. I can step out of it." And that is what matters. Survival is not simply escaping physical danger. It is reclaiming the mind, the identity, and the autonomy that were stolen. Even weeks later in my quiet apartment, I hear the faint creak of the floorboards or the low hum of the heater, and I think of Carla. Her strength is a reminder. Evil can leave invisible marks, hide in plain sight and linger quietly, but vigilance, empathy, and courage can restore what was taken. True survival is not just living, it is reclaiming yourself. Long before the blood and the broken watch, before the endless nights staring at the ceiling, straining to catch noises that didn't exist, I believed I was chasing nothing more than a dream. That's what ambition feels like when you're young. Bright, reckless, seductive, convincing you that pain is proof you're alive. It was October 2002 when I stepped off the bus into Tijuana, Mexico. The air hung heavy with salt and exhaust. It carried the acrid tang of hot metal and the faint, persistent smell of the sea. I was 29, hungry for something bigger than my life in Portland. My company had offered me a chance to manage a cross-border partnership, a golden opportunity, my boss had said, and I had grabbed it without hesitation. One suitcase, a kiss for Claire, promises to call every night, and I was gone. The Sandalia Motel squatted at the edge of the city, where the paved road gave way to dust and the night smelled of tequila and gasoline. Its neon sign flickered sporadically, buzzing as if unsure of its own existence. Cracked stucco walls hinted at years of neglect. Still, I convinced myself it had charm, even character. At the front desk, a young man named Raoul smiled at me. But it didn't reach his eyes. His hair was slicked back perfectly, his uniform starched and neat. I handed him a $50 tip with a nervous chuckle. "American hospitality," I said. He laughed, but it sounded hollow, almost rehearsed. "Enjoy your stay, senor," he said, sliding the key across the counter. "Room 7, quiet side." That night I lay on the thin mattress, thoughts spinning. Claire, the promotion, the watch on my wrist. My father's watch. To the one who never gives up. He'd given it to me the year before he died of a heart attack. I had never gone a day without it. It was a promise, a tether to him, a reminder I was still trying to honor. Outside, the highway hummed faintly. I didn't know it then, but that constant, restless sound would follow me for years. The next morning I woke before dawn. My meeting in the city had gone better than I dared hope. Contracts signed, handshakes exchanged. For the first time in a long while, the world seemed to be tilting into alignment. When I called the motel for a cab, Raoul answered. "Si, senor?" he said, too eager, too friendly. "Of course." As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the cab arrived. The driver said little. Older man, expressionless, dark glasses, even though the night had already swallowed the light. The city gave way to quieter streets, puddles catching orange reflections from the street lamps. I noticed how unnervingly empty it all felt. Then came the screech. Tires burned. A car appeared from nowhere, blocking the road. Doors burst open. 4 masked armed men poured out, shouting, threatening. The driver didn't flinch. "Your wallet," one yelled, waving a gun. My hands shook violently as I handed it over. My phone followed. Then one of them saw the glint on my wrist. "Take it off," he ordered. It was like someone demanding a piece of my father. I hesitated, just for a heartbeat. The gun cracked against my cheek. Warm, coppery blood filled my mouth. My ears rang. "Take it off." I unclasped it. My hands were slick with sweat. The man snatched the watch, gave a mocking salute, and leapt back into the car. They were gone, leaving only the smell of exhaust and a deafening silence. I turned to the driver, expecting anger, panic, anything. But he sat there, hands steady on the wheel, face unreadable. "Drive," I whispered. He obeyed. At the motel, I stumbled into the lobby, blood dripping freely. "You called that cab," I shouted at Raoul. "You set me up." He looked at me with those same hollow eyes. "Senor," he said softly, "you must have been unlucky." Behind him, a shadow shifted in the hallway. Someone listening. I ran. Didn't pack, didn't look back. I just ran. By the time I reached San Diego, dawn was breaking. On the bus, I stared at my reflection. Swollen cheek, split lip, no watch, only the imprint where it had been. I told the border agent I'd been mugged. He nodded as if he'd heard it all before. Back home, Claire tried to comfort me. "You're safe," she said, cupping my face, warmth against my bloodied skin. But safety had already begun to feel like a lie. But something inside me had shifted. Safety no longer felt real, not even at home, not even with Claire's arms around me. A week later, I bought a replica of my father's watch. Same model, same engraving. To the one who never gives up. But when I held it in my hand, it felt hollow, like a lie. The real one was still out there, somewhere in the dark, on the wrist of someone who didn't deserve it. I called the Tijuana police. They took a report, nodded politely, and never followed up. Months passed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been marked. At night, I dreamed of that cab, of Raoul's polite, hollow smile, of my father's voice murmuring, "Don't give up, son." I drank more than I should. Claire noticed. "You're still there, aren't you?" she asked one night, her voice low and tired. "In that place?" I said nothing. And she was right. Then one morning, scrolling through an online forum, I read that the Sandalia Motel had closed. Health violations, one post said, but a few replies hinted at something darker. Disappearances. I didn't want to believe it. Deep down, I did. 2 years later, I went back. Not out of courage, obsession. I told Claire it was another business trip, but the truth was, I couldn't live another day not knowing. I rented a car in San Diego and crossed the border. The road to the Sandalia was overgrown now, weeds cracking through the asphalt. The sign was half buried in dust. The motel itself crouched there, abandoned, windows shattered, paint peeled to bone. I pushed open the door. It groaned like a living thing, and inside the air smelled of mildew and old memories. Room 7 was still there. My suitcase, my papers, they were gone, of course, but on the nightstand lay something small, glinting faintly in a crack of sunlight. My watch. I picked it up. The hands were frozen at 11:46. I turned it over. The engraving was scratched but still legible. To the one who never gives up. My stomach twisted. Someone had left it there, waiting. I didn't stay long. Heart hammering, I walked out, half expecting to see Raoul behind the counter, watching. But the lobby was empty. Only dust, only silence. When I reached the car, a young man in a security uniform appeared from behind the building. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. "This place. Bad things happened." I nodded. "I know." He tilted his head, eyes sharp. "You one of them?" "No," I said quietly. "Just someone who got lucky." It's been 20 years now. I'm 49. The replica watch sits in my dresser drawer. The original, the one from that motel, I keep locked away. Not because it's valuable, but because it reminds me of everything I almost lost. Claire left eventually. I can't blame her. I was living in two worlds, the one I walked through and the one that replayed endlessly in my mind. After that, I started writing. Stories about roads that go nowhere, hotels that smell like regret, people learning the hard truth. Safety is an illusion. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the hum of the highway. I tell myself it's just the wind, but deep down, I know it's something else. A reminder that every choice carries a cost. When I close my eyes, I see that younger version of myself, the one full of hope, wearing my father's watch like it could protect me from the world. If I could speak to him now, I'd say one thing. You can't outrun what you don't understand. Life teaches us that not everything lost can be replaced, and not every second chance is a blessing. Trust is precious, but blind trust can destroy you. The past doesn't disappear when you escape it. It lingers, waiting for you to face it. Sometimes survival isn't about bravery. It's about knowing when to walk away and never looking back. I'd spent most of my adult life chasing the perfect shot. The kind of photograph that made strangers pause mid-page, their eyes catching on something they couldn't quite name. People like to imagine it was a glamorous life, but most days it was just mud, bad coffee, and the quiet humiliation of missed chances. That winter of 2011, I was 34, tired, and broke enough to start wondering if I was still chasing art or just running from a steady paycheck. I'd been sent north for a wildlife series, timberwolves in the snow. My partner bailed when the forecast turned ugly, but I went anyway. I'd told myself, courage separates the great from the forgotten. Later, I'd learn it mostly separated the reckless from the lucky. By the time I realized how fast the blizzard was rolling in, I was 40 miles from the nearest town. My crew had already called it off. The truck fishtailed more than once, tires whispering over ice, and the wind screamed hard enough to erase the road shoulder. I didn't even notice the sign until it flickered through the white Pine Hollow Motel. I don't know what made me pull in. Instinct, maybe, or just exhaustion masquerading as bravery. The parking lot was half buried in snow, the neon sign sputtering like it was fighting for its last breath. Inside, a weak bell jingled as I pushed open the door. The lobby was dim, smelled faintly of cold air and mothballs. A woman appeared from behind the counter, frail, probably in her late 70s, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "Rough night to be on the road," she said. Her voice was thin and papery like wind over dry leaves. "You're lucky we're still open." Her name tag read, Mrs. Clausen. "Yeah," I said, stamping snow from my boots. Didn't think I'd make it much farther. She nodded slowly, not really looking at me, eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "Room 9, she murmured, sliding a tarnished brass key across the counter. "Don't mind the wind. It gets loud up here." I paid in cash. Her fingers brushed mine, cold and dry as parchment. "Thank you," I said, forcing a smile. She didn't answer. The hallway smelled of dust and old kerosene. Only one light worked, humming faintly overhead. Just another lonely stop between assignments, I told myself. Just another night. I didn't know then how long that night would follow me. Room 9 looked like a time capsule from the 70s. Wood paneling, faded floral curtains, a TV that probably only played static. The heater wheezed to life, coughing dust before settling into a low, uneven groan. I hung up my parka, plugged in my laptop, and made instant coffee that tasted faintly of rust and cardboard. I tried to edit my shots, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. The silence outside wasn't peaceful. It was dense, the kind that presses against your skull until you start hearing your own heartbeat. I pulled the curtain aside. Snow poured down in thick sheets glowing orange under the single parking lot light. Beyond that, nothing but endless woods. Sometime after midnight, I must have dozed off at the desk. When I woke, it was to a sound, a dull, distant thump. At first, I thought it was ice sliding off the roof. Then came another, closer. I rubbed my eyes, pushed up from the chair, and shuffled to the window. The glass was fogged, breath white, but through the condensation, I saw them. Footprints. A single line leading from the tree line straight toward my window, then stopping. No return tracks, just ending there. "Probably old," I muttered. Snow must have buried the rest. Still, my pulse was thrumming in my ears. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. Pulling on my coat, I stepped outside, telling myself it was just for peace of mind. The cold hit like knives, sharp enough to sting my teeth. The prints were fresh, edges clean, the snow still loose, not yet crusted over. They led directly from the woods to my window. Nowhere else. I followed them halfway before stopping, breath turning to smoke in the dark. Something about the way those footprints ended. No turn, no stumble, not even a hint of hesitation. Made the hair on my arms rise. It wasn't how people walked. It was how things stopped. I went back inside, heart hammering in my chest, and shoved a chair under the doorknob. Then I laughed, too loud, too forced, a nervous bark that didn't sound like me. "It's fine," I muttered to the empty room. "It's just snow. Just wind." But the heater moaned again. A hollow metallic sound that shuddered through the vents, and the window rattled in its frame like something outside was testing it. The room didn't feel fine anymore. It felt like a stage set after the actors had gone home. Hollow, waiting. By 2:30, sleep was impossible. Every few minutes came a noise, a faint scrape, a shifting creak. Maybe the wind. Maybe not. Eventually, I decided to find Mrs. Clausen. Tell her I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was outside. Maybe she'd laugh, calm me down. The lobby was empty. The single bulb above the desk flickered weakly, buzzing in the silence. Behind the counter, the office door stood slightly ajar, and from inside came a faint murmur, a voice undercut with static. French, I thought. A radio. "Mrs. Clausen?" I called softly. No answer. I stepped closer, knocked on the door frame. The radio hissed once, then fell silent. The air changed, heavier somehow, colder. The kind of cold that feels like it's watching. Behind the desk, I noticed the key rack. No car keys hanging there, no tags. And on the open guest register, only one name. Mine. The prickle at the back of my neck deepened into a chill. I turned and walked quickly down the hall. Halfway to my room, I glanced through the window at the parking lot. The footprints were different now, closer. They reached right up to my door. I locked it again, this time dragging the dresser across the floor until it jammed against the frame. Every sound after that felt pointed. The wind wasn't random anymore. It was rhythmic. The heater's groan felt like breathing. Even the clock's tick seemed to wait between beats. Around 3, there was a new sound. A faint, deliberate tap, tap, tap against the glass. I froze. 3 taps. Then silence, and then a voice. A man's voice, calm even. "You left your light on." Not a question. A statement. Adrenaline erased everything else. I grabbed my tripod, fingers slippery with sweat, holding it like a weapon. "Who's there?" I shouted. Silence. Then the faint crunch of snow, slow and receding toward the woods. My phone was still useless. New signal, new lifeline. My pulse thudded in my ears as I shoved my feet into my boots, grabbed my truck keys and wrenched open the door. The night hit me like a flash grenade. Blinding white, wind slicing sideways. The footprints now led away from my door, disappearing into the black shape of trees. And then I saw it. Every window in the front row of the motel stood open, curtains billowing like pale hands in the storm. Everyone except mine. That broke something in me. I ran. The truck engine coughed twice before catching, headlights carving through the snow. I didn't look back. The road was half buried, the world reduced to white and panic, but I kept driving. For the first time in years, I prayed. Quiet, desperate, like a man bargaining with something that might be listening. By the time the sky turned gray, I was just outside Winnipeg. I pulled into a diner, shaking so badly I nearly spilled my coffee. My mind replayed everything in fragments. The woman's distant eyes, the empty register, that voice at the window. I told myself I'd call the motel later. Explain, apologize, maybe send money for the room. But part of me didn't want to hear her voice again. Around noon, I finally made the call. The number rang twice before a man answered, voice flat, mildly irritated. Pine Hollow Motel. Hi, I said, my throat dry. I stayed there last night, room 9. I think I left some equipment behind. A pause. Then, you must have the wrong number. Pine Hollow's been closed for years, since 2007. I laughed, a brittle sound. No, that's impossible. I spoke to an older woman, Mrs. Clausen. There's no one by that name, he cut in. That property's condemned. The call ended. My stomach dropped like a trapdoor. That night, I woke to the faint scent of pine. My camera bag sat at the foot of my bed, the same one I'd left behind at the motel. A small puddle of melting snow spread beneath it. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. When I finally did, the lens cap was streaked with thin lines of mud, and on the inside pocket, clear as day, were footprints. Small, pressed from the inside out. I've told myself there's a logical explanation. Maybe I grabbed it half asleep. Maybe someone mailed it back. But it never left my sight after that morning. And every January, when the wind claws at my apartment windows, I hear it again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Sometimes the past leaves footprints you can't explain. Not because it's supernatural, but because fear itself can carve its own truth. Trust your instincts. Respect your limits. Know when to walk away. Survival isn't about courage. It's about listening when something deep inside whispers, leave while you still can. I never thought a routine Friday night could twist the way I saw the world forever. My name's Dylan Reed. I was 20 then, a college kid in Eugene, Oregon, barely keeping it together with a part-time job delivering pizzas. It wasn't much, but it paid rent and let me breathe without asking anyone for help. That night in October 2019, the rain hadn't stopped since dusk. Sheets of it blurred the streetlights and mist clung to the air like smoke. The neon signs of shuttered shops blinked in and out through the fog, pale ghosts in the wet dark. I'd just picked up an order from the downtown pizza place when my boss crackled through the headset. Dylan, this one's a good one, tip heavy. Willow Creek Motel, edge of town, 3rd floor. Guy says it's a party. Great, I muttered, rubbing a hand over my eyes. Willow Creek Motel. I'd passed it 100 times, and every time something about it made my skin crawl. The kind of building that looked fine from a distance. Bright sign, fresh paint, but up close it felt wrong. I'd delivered there before, but never to the 3rd floor. By the time I pulled into the cracked parking lot, the rain had thinned to a mist. The pavement shimmered, reflecting the motel's flickering neon sign like a pulse. The air carried that sour mix of mildew, cigarettes, and something older, something rotten under the surface. The lobby was empty. No chatter, no TV humming from the back office. Just a dusty counter, a stack of faded brochures, and a tarnished bell that left a gray smudge on my finger when I pressed it. Above the desk, a security camera tilted with a faint mechanical whine following me. I cleared my throat. Delivery for room... A door creaked and a tall, thin man stepped out from a back hallway. His smile was stretched too wide, like he'd been caught mid-laugh at a joke only he understood. His eyes never quite landed on me, They flicked around, jittery, like he was scanning invisible movement in the air. "Third floor," he said, pressing a small envelope into my hand. "Party's upstairs. Make sure they get the pizzas." His voice was calm, too calm, and something about it felt rehearsed, deliberate. My stomach nodded. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. Like he was testing how quickly I'd obey. Sure, I murmured, pocketing the envelope. The stairwell was colder than it should have been. The air hung heavy, damp, and smelled faintly of old carpet and wet wood. My shoes made sticky sounds against the floor with every step. The overhead light flickered so fast it made the shadows twitch like living things. "It's just an old building," I told myself quietly. That's all. By the second floor, I noticed a door cracked open. I slowed, curiosity gnawing at the edges of my fear. Inside, chairs were stacked in messy piles. The air stung faintly of smoke. Something burned maybe days ago, but no one was there. "Maintenance," I whispered. Probably just maintenance, but I didn't believe it. Not really. The third-floor corridor felt stretched, as if the hallway itself had lengthened since I started climbing. The fluorescent bulbs hummed and blinked, their light breaking in uneven bursts. Shadows pooled between doors and slid forward as I walked. My palms were slick around the pizza boxes, and I had to shift my grip before they slipped. There was a faint metallic tang in the air. Blood, maybe, or rust. I couldn't tell. When I finally found the room number the man had given me, I hesitated. The door was old, its paint peeling in strips, the frame warped like it had swollen from years of rain. I knocked once, then again, no answer. I tried the knob. It turned easily. Too easily. The door creaked open, spilling a breath of cold, stagnant air into the hall. Inside was darkness, deep and absolute. No voices, no music, no laughter. Just the faint drip of water somewhere above. The silence pressed against my ears until I could hear nothing but my own pulse. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Pizza delivery?" Nothing. And then, from behind me, the metallic click of the stairwell door. "Help me carry them inside," said a calm, almost whispering voice. I turned. It was the man from the lobby, his smile gone now. His face was still, eyes sharp and predatory, gleaming under the dim hall light. The way he looked at me, steady, assessing, made my stomach twist hard, like he was studying a specimen, like he'd been waiting. Something was wrong, deeply, unmistakably wrong. The realization hit like ice in my veins. One pizza box slipped from my hands, then another. They hit the damp carpet with a wet, muffled splat. The smell of melted cheese and tomato sauce mingled with mildew and stale smoke until the air itself felt spoiled. Adrenaline surged. I didn't think, I just ran. The hallway seemed to tilt beneath me as I sprinted, my shoulders scraping against the wallpaper to keep balance. Every shadow seemed to stretch and grab as I passed, the flickering lights distorting the corridor into something unreal. My breath rasped in my throat as I reached the stairwell. My shoes squeaked against the soggy carpet, loud enough to make me flinch. The stairs felt endless, slick beneath my feet. Halfway down, I slipped on a wet patch, my ankle twisting painfully, but I kept going, half limping, half falling. Behind me, footsteps, slow, deliberate, patient. The sound was steady, rhythmically matching mine, but never rushing. He wasn't chasing me. He was following, like he already knew there was nowhere to run. "Leave me the hell alone," I shouted, but my voice cracked, swallowed by the empty stairwell. The only reply was the echo of my own words, and the steady tread of his shoes, one after another, soft but relentless. By the time I reached the lobby, my chest was burning, vision swimming. The counter was empty. No envelope, no man. Just the same motionless brochures and that single security camera above the desk, its lens slowly tilting to track me. "Please," I gasped, stumbling toward the exit. I grabbed the handle, yanked hard, nothing. It didn't move. Panic hit full force. I slammed my fists against the glass, the sound sharp in the dead air. "Come on, open!" The handle finally gave. The door swung outward and rain exploded against me. Cold, sharp, punishing. I didn't care. I ran into it, the downpour drenching my clothes instantly. The gravel of the lot was slick. I slipped, hit my knees, tore my palms, scrambled back up. My car sat where I left it, half shrouded in mist. I fumbled for the keys, hands shaking so hard I dropped them twice before finally jamming one into the ignition. The engine sputtered, choked, then roared to life. Tires spun in the mud as I tore out of that parking lot, my heart pounding in time with the wipers beating against the windshield. Even after I hit the main road, I couldn't stop shaking. My hands trembled so violently on the wheel that I had to pull over just to breathe. I sat there in the rain, headlights carving pale tunnels into the fog, wondering what the hell had just happened. Weeks later, I saw a story online, local news. The Willow Creek Motel had been abandoned for months. No guests, no staff. Just an empty shell of a building rotting on the edge of town. I remember staring at the article until the screen blurred. Whoever had called that order had known where I'd be, what route I'd take, and how I'd react. It wasn't random. It was calculated. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense in the worst possible way. Every detail, the empty lobby, the forced smile, the party upstairs, had been part of a setup. Not to scare me, not at first, but to guide me. To push me where he wanted me. Like a mouse through a maze. I realized how close I'd come to disappearing that night. One hesitation, one wrong turn, that could have been it. When I told my friends, they laughed, called it a creepy story, said I was exaggerating. But I remember the feeling too clearly, the deliberate control, the invisible strings pulling me into danger step by step. That wasn't panic or imagination. That was someone using fear like a tool. Years later, it still clings to me. I avoid empty buildings, dark stairwells, any place where silence feels too complete. Every flickering light, every strange delivery call, my pulse spikes before my brain even catches up. Sometimes I drive past the old Willow Creek Motel. It's fenced off now, the windows shattered, the sign half missing, but every time I feel my chest tighten, my hands grip the steering wheel until my knuckles whiten. In my mind, I can still see that grin, the one that stretched too wide, hovering behind a third-floor window, patient as ever. That night never really left me. It taught me something I can't unlearn. The world's quiet isn't safety, it's camouflage. Danger doesn't always roar or chase. Sometimes it waits silent and watchful, until you walk right into it. Curiosity can be a noose if you don't trust your instincts. Awareness, caution, and the willingness to listen to that small voice of fear, those aren't paranoia. They're survival. Because real danger doesn't announce itself. It hides in plain sight, watching, waiting for the one moment you stop paying attention. I still remember that summer heat, the kind that pressed against your skin until it felt like breathing through syrup. July 1996, I was 12, old enough to see that the world didn't always make sense, but still young enough to think my mother could bend it back into shape if she just tried hard enough. We were leaving Tucson for Los Angeles, chasing what Mom called a fresh start. I didn't know what that meant. Not really. All I knew was that my parents had stopped talking, except when they were arguing in low, sharp voices that never quite went away. Then one morning, Mom was stuffing our lives into the trunk of a faded green Toyota Camry, the kind with bumper stickers curling at the edges like tired smiles. Caleb, my 8-year-old brother, was slumped in the back beside me, legs sticky from the vinyl seats kicking Mom's chair every few minutes. "Are we almost there yet?" he groaned. "Almost where?" I asked, half teasing. He stared out the window, squinting against the glare. "Wherever Mom thinks happiness lives." He said it so simply that it stayed with me long after the desert blurred into ribbons of asphalt melting under the Arizona sun. Mom hummed now and then, her voice barely audible over the rattle of the AC. Every few miles she twisted the radio knob, hunting for a station that wasn't just static. I watched her from the back, her hand steady on the wheel, the other tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The exhaustion was there, sitting just under her eyes, but so was something else. Resolve, maybe. By the time we rolled into Yuma, the sky had turned a dusty orange, heavy and low. The Camry's engine wheezed like it was exhaling relief. The Blue Lantern Motel appeared at the edge of the road. A squat one-story building with paint peeling in strips and a neon sign that blinked vacancy, like it was barely holding on. The pool gate leaned crooked and a Coke machine droned outside the office. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and something metallic, sharp and cold. Mom filled out the guest form while Caleb leaned against me, eyelids fluttering. That's when I noticed him. A man sitting in the corner. He looked like he'd grown out of the desert itself. Cracked skin, boots dusted white, eyes the color of scorched earth. He didn't move, didn't smile, just watched. "Mom," I whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "That guy's watching us." She glanced over her shoulder, quick, assessing, then turned back to the clerk. "Ignore him, honey. He's probably just tired like us." But when she took the room key, I could still feel his eyes on us, following, measuring. Room 17 reeked of old smoke and bleach. The carpet was stiff and left black grit on our socks. The air conditioner rattled like it was trying to escape the window frame. Caleb threw himself on the bed and flipped through channels until Full House flickered on, the colors washed out and ghostly. Mom sat at the edge of her bed, pressing her fingers to her temples. 10 hours on the road, she sighed. "We'll swim, grab some food, and call it a night." Outside, the pool glowed turquoise under a swarm of buzzing tiki lamps, their plastic faces lit by dying bulbs. Caleb was already tugging on her hand. "Come on, Mom, you promised." I followed, half wishing I hadn't. The air was heavy and wet. The deck radiated heat even as the sky went purple. My swimsuit clung to my skin, and then I saw him again. The man from the lobby. Sitting near the fence, still in those same dusty clothes, boots planted firm, his face unreadable. Watching. Mom saw him too. Her jaw tightened. 10 minutes, she muttered. So we splashed, pretending not to notice him, while the night hummed around us, thick and waiting. I could feel his gaze, bare, heavy, suffocating, pressing down on us like the weight of the desert itself. Even when I tried not to look, I could feel it crawling across my skin. Finally, Mom broke the silence. "That's enough," she said tightly, her voice low but firm. We climbed out of the pool, dripping and quiet. The night air clung to us, warm and electric. As we walked back toward room 17, I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was still there. Same spot, same posture, motionless, watching. Inside, Mom slid the lock, then latched the deadbolt. "Don't worry," she said with a small, practiced smile. "People are weird sometimes. Doesn't mean they're dangerous." But the tremor in her hand said otherwise. Sometime after 11, I woke to the sound of water running. The shower hissed behind the thin bathroom door. The fan buzzed, soft and steady, blending with the hum of the air conditioner. Caleb was sprawled beside me, one arm hanging off the bed, mouth open in sleep. The room smelled faintly of chlorine and motel soap. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I opened my notebook and began to doodle. Lazy circles, random words, little monsters with crooked teeth. The kind of nonsense you draw to keep from thinking too much. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. A man's voice followed, low, too calm. "Housekeeping." My throat went dry. "We already got towels," I called out, barely above a whisper. A pause. Then quieter now, "Just checking." "You had a nice swim?" The way he said it, and flat, deliberate, wasn't friendly. It wasn't even curious. It was a statement. A reminder. My blood went cold. The door handle turned once, twice, then stopped. "Mom!" I screamed. The bathroom door burst open. Mom flew out, dripping wet, wrapped in a towel. She slammed the deadbolt and pressed her shoulder against the door. "Who's there?" she demanded. Silence. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow and heavy, retreating down the walkway. We stood there, breathing hard, listening to every creak and hum. Mom's chest heaved like she couldn't pull in enough air. Finally, she whispered, "Pack up, now." No one argued. Caleb rubbed his eyes, groggy and scared. "What's happening?" "We're leaving," she said, and that was all. While she threw things into bags, I watched her hands, trembling, fast, focused. She picked up the phone and dialed the front desk. A man answered, his voice thick with sleep. "We don't have housekeeping at night," he said flatly. "But someone was at our door." Mom snapped. "Ma'am, maybe you imagined—" She hung up before he could finish. By midnight, we were back in the car. The Camry's headlights cut across the empty parking lot. The neon sign flickered in the rearview mirror. Blue lantern, buzzing like a dying insect. And there beneath it stood the man. His figure outlined in pale red light, perfectly still, eyes fixed on us. Mom didn't speak. She just pressed her foot down. The tires crunched over gravel and the road swallowed us whole. The desert stretched out, black, endless, silent. Caleb fell asleep again, his head against my shoulder, breathing slow and steady. Mom kept both hands on the wheel, jaw clenched, her eyes locked on the road ahead. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but I already knew the answer. When we crossed into California, she finally spoke, barely audible over the engine. Some people, she said, they look at others like prey. You can't ever ignore that feeling when it hits you. Ever. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just watched the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or worse, a shape keeping pace behind us. I'm 39 now, living in Seattle with a husband and 2 kids. But every time we stop at a motel, I still check every lock. Twice. Sometimes 3 times. Mom passed in 2017. At her funeral, Caleb told me he'd driven through Yuma a few years back. The Blue Lantern's gone, he said quietly. Torn down. Cops said there were disappearances. Probably more than anyone knew. That night I dreamed of room 17. The rattle of the air conditioner, the flickering pool lights, that slow, deliberate knock. And then that voice whispering through the door. You had a nice swim? I woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding just like it had 27 years ago. There's a kind of innocence that never returns once you've been afraid like that. Fear leaves a fingerprint. It doesn't fade. It just sinks deeper. Even now, whenever I drive past an old neon sign on a dark highway, I feel it again. That crawling awareness that someone, somewhere, might still be watching. Life teaches you that instinct isn't paranoia. It's protection. The world can be unpredictable, but that quiet voice inside, and the one that says, lock the door, leave sooner, trust your gut. It's there for a reason. Fear, when it comes from truth, isn't weakness. It's survival disguised as wisdom. It was late February 2019, and Colorado had settled into its cruel, bone-deep winter rhythm. The kind of cold that turns breath into smoke and makes the silence outside feel heavy, like it could crush you if you stood still too long. My name's Evan Mercer. I was 22 then, working the graveyard shift at the Starlight Motor Lodge for about 6 months. I wasn't supposed to stay that long. The job was meant to be a stopgap, something to keep my account from bleeding dry after I dropped out of college. But somehow the monotony grew comforting. There was a strange safety in routine. The low hum of the vending machine, the flickering lobby TV with its endless loop of late-night reruns, the bitter scent of old coffee brewing at 2 a.m. The Starlight sat alone on a forgotten stretch of highway, wedged between 2 empty fields, one littered with rusting trucks half swallowed by snow, the other a wasteland of dead grass bowing under a constant icy wind. Most nights were slow. A weary trucker looking for rest, a couple seeking privacy, or a road-worn traveler too tired to notice the peeling paint or the sputtering neon sign. Lately, though, something felt off. Rooms 5 through 9 were closed for renovation after a plumbing collapse, leaving me with nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of the wind clawing at the windows. The night started like any other. I microwaved leftovers from dinner, skimmed through the guest registry, and texted my sister, "I'll quit soon, I promise." She sent back a thumbs-up emoji. At 1:47 a.m., the security monitor caught a flicker of movement in the parking lot, a shadow darting behind one of the concrete beams. I leaned in, squinting, nothing. Then, a motion light near room 2 blinked on, buzzing faintly in the cold. My stomach tightened. The registry said the room was empty. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air bit through my jacket immediately. Snow crunched under my boots, each step echoing in the stillness. The lot was deserted. Only a half-buried soda can rolled lazily in the wind. I exhaled, watched my breath fog, and headed back in. The monitor flickered again. This time, a figure stood at the edge of the lot, a tall shape, face hidden beneath a zipped-up coat. My pulse jumped. I turned toward the window, nothing. When I looked back at the screen, the figure was gone. I called Mr. Clean, the property manager. Retired cop. Grumpy as hell. "Probably a drifter," he muttered, voice thick with sleep. "Lock up, don't do anything stupid. I'll check it out in the morning." When the line went dead, I sat there for a while trying to convince myself he was right. I opened a book, pretended to read, but my eyes kept darting to the monitor. Then a faint tap, tap, tap on the glass, metallic. I froze. Slowly, I looked up. A handprint, wet and fresh, was sliding down the lobby door. No footsteps outside, no shadow. Just that glistening smear of water against the glass. I locked the door, heart hammering. My fingers hovered over the silent emergency button, every nerve screaming. The lights flickered, buzzed, then dimmed. The landline crackled dead. My phone showed no service. That's when headlights swept across the lot, flooding the lobby with harsh white light. An old pickup truck idled just beyond the window. Relief hit until I realized the driver's seat was empty. The engine was running, but no one was inside. The passenger door creaked open, snow blowing in sideways. My throat went dry. Hello? My voice cracked in the frozen air. Only the motel's old swinging sign answered, its rusted chains groaning as the word vacancy squeaked back and forth in the wind. Then a sharp bang echoed from down the hall. Room 3, I froze. Footsteps followed, soft, dragging, uneven. No, I whispered, shaking my head. My pulse thundered in my ears. Still, I forced myself forward, flashlight trembling in my grip as I moved down the narrow corridor. The carpet squelched under my boots, damp and heavy. Footprints, wet, unfamiliar, led straight ahead. The door to room 3 was ajar, a weak light flickering from within. I pushed it open with the edge of my sleeve. The room was empty. An overturned chair, cigarette smoke hanging thick in the air like someone had just exhaled. Then the door slammed shut behind me. I shouted, a raw, startled sound that echoed strangely. The reverb bending my voice until it came back to me, warped, whispering the same word I'd just yelled. I spun around, flashlight beam shaking over peeling wallpaper and shadows that didn't belong. Nothing there. The emergency lights flashed crimson for a moment, then died, plunging everything into darkness. My heart lurched. I bolted for the lobby, the beam of my flashlight swinging wildly. The front door stood wide open, wind howling through it, shredding paper from the desk and scattering receipts like snowflakes. Across the lot, he was there again. The man in the coat, closer this time, watching. I dove behind the counter, breath coming in shallow bursts. My thumb hovered over the emergency button, but I hesitated. What if it didn't work? Boots crunched outside, slow, deliberate, circling, then silence. The power went out completely. The hum of the vending machine died, and the world seemed to inhale and hold its breath. The only light came from my trembling flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The handprint on the glass door was gone. In its place, a trail of wet footprints leading toward the back office. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. The office door was open. I ran. My boots slid on ice as I burst through the exit, lungs burning. By the time I reached the road, headlights appeared out of the snow. Relief crashed over me like a wave Clean's truck. I waved frantically. Someone's in there. He climbed out, flashlight in hand, jaw set in a tired scowl. Together we searched every room, every hallway, nothing, no footprints, no sign of a pickup. The air inside felt heavy and wrong. When we checked the monitors, the feed had stopped recording at 1:46 a.m., right before I'd first seen the figure. Cleaner rubbed his face and sighed. Happens more than you'd think. Wind, lights, mind playing tricks, but it wasn't tricks. I knew that. Something in that motel had seen me, recognized me, and whatever it wasn't human. Not entirely. I quit the next morning. Never went back for my paycheck. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my Denver apartment made my pulse jump. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Every motel I stayed in afterward felt alive, watching. I started to believe that noticing, really noticing, had invited something. 2 weeks later, the news broke. The Starlight Motor Lodge had burned down. Electrical fire, they said. But when firefighters cleared the debris, they found the lobby phone melted, receiver off the hook, and above the counter, faint, blackened into the wall, a single handprint. Same size, same shape. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to know. But once something touches your attention, it doesn't let go. Months passed. I moved into a smaller place. I avoided highways at night. Tried therapy. Nothing worked. The memory clung to me like frost that wouldn't melt. The motel had been a lesson. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. Fear is not your enemy, it's a warning. The world's small cracks, its shadows, its quiet anomalies, they aren't always imagination, even if people tell you they are. I carry that night with me still, a reminder that awareness comes with a cost. Some doors, once opened, even in thought, never close again. Sometimes I still catch sight of shadows in empty motel parking lots. Sometimes the wind carries the faint tap-tap of fingers on glass. and I remember noticing as part of being alive, but some things never let you unsee them. The rain had been relentless for 3 straight days, drumming against the windshield like a furious percussionist. Interstate 70 stretched ahead, a black ribbon swallowed by stormy gray, headlights smeared into ghostly streaks on the wet asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed, knuckles whitening under the dim dashboard glow. Chicago had been suffocating. The apartment I once shared with my ex had become a mausoleum more than a home. Divorce papers sat on the kitchen counter, unsigned yet glaring at me every morning like silent judgment. My daughter Emma lived with her mother, and even the phone calls felt strained, like speaking through glass I couldn't quite penetrate. I wasn't entirely sure why I was leaving Chicago. Maybe it was the silence that pressed down like fog. Maybe it was the need to outrun the collapse of everything I'd known. The car carried me into Indiana, the rain hammering the roof like relentless drums. When the Redwood Pines motor inn finally emerged, I barely noticed its faded red doors or the flickering neon sign that buzzed weakly against the storm. The motel looked tired, abandoned even if technically still open. Inside, the clerk was a gaunt man with a nicotine-stained mustache. Without looking up, he slid me a key. Room 12. Try not to mind the folks next door. They've been here a while. I nodded automatically, too exhausted to ask questions. The room smelled of damp carpet and bleach. The air conditioner rattled and hissed like it wanted to escape. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and dialed Emma's number. No answer. "Love you, bug," I whispered into the dead line, voice tight, hollow. Hanging up, I sank into the bed, hoping sleep would swallow me whole. The storm outside made the walls feel closer, pressing in. Then came a bang, sharp and deliberate, from the wall of room 11. Voices rose. A man, rough, harsh. "I told you not to talk to him again, Vanessa." The woman's response was muffled, a trembling plea. "Bobby, please." Then glass shattered. A heavy thud reverberated through the adjoining wall. My chest froze. Part of me wanted to turn away, pretend it wasn't happening. Another part, the part that had always loathed helplessness, wanted to see. I cracked the door just slightly. Rain lashed the corridor. Room 11's door was ajar. A man's silhouette loomed inside. Broad shoulders, a neck tattoo barely visible through the shadows, something metallic in his hands. My heart stopped. "Bobby." He turned. I ducked instinctively. My fingers fumbled for the phone, front desk, no answer. 1 dropped calls. The storm had taken half the cell towers with it. I stayed low, praying they wouldn't notice me until slow, deliberate knocks rapped at my door. "You watching, pal?" A voice taunted. A whisper followed from the vent above. "You're a salesman. Long drive alone." Both a man and woman laughed, soft and cruel. My pulse hammered in my ears. I zipped my suitcase, calculating escape versus discovery, and decided enough. Headlights sliced through the rain-streaked window. 2 men approached, Bobby and another, a crowbar glinting wet under the flickering neon. I crouched behind the bed, thunder masking my movements. With a surge of panic, I wrenched open the bathroom window. Mud caked my shoes, water soaked my coat. I sprinted to my car, engine sputtering before roaring to life. Behind me, the neon sign flickered, a stuttering red warning. By the time I reached the truck stop 20 miles away, I was shaking uncontrollably. Police later confirmed my fear. Redwood Pines had been condemned months ago. Robert Hale and Vanessa Cole had died in room 11 the previous May. I never drove that route again. But even in Chicago, when rain drums against the windows like the night's percussion, I hear that muffled thud through the walls, as if Bobby never left. Before that night, my life had been ordinary on the surface. I worked for a medical supply company, driving hundreds of miles each week, selling equipment to hospitals and clinics. The travel kept me distracted, a necessary escape from my failed marriage and the quiet despair that settled like dust in my apartment. Chicago had been beautiful once, the skyline etched in winter fog, Lake Michigan stretching silver under muted sun, neighborhood diners with endless coffee refills. Now those images felt distant, fragile, like a life that had been quietly dismantled while I slept. But now every street I drove felt like a reminder of loss, like the asphalt itself was stitched with memories I couldn't escape. I had met Elise in college, sharp, quick-witted, fiercely independent. Our daughter, Emma, had been everything we'd dreamed of until arguments about money, career, and our future splintered the fragile foundation we'd built. The divorce was brutal in its quiet, insidious way. No screaming matches, no drawn-out court battles, just emptiness, missed calls, and the relentless ticking of clocks in a hollow apartment. So I drove. Sometimes to Cleveland, sometimes Indianapolis, anywhere that put the road between me and what I'd left behind. When I stumbled upon the Redwood Pines Motor Inn, it promised anonymity, a pause from the world. I didn't expect it to feel alive, to breathe, to push back against me in ways I couldn't rationalize. I kept replaying that night over and over. The storm, the knocks, the vent, the whispering voices. I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, paranoia born from exhaustion. Yet my hands shook every time I drove through rural Indiana afterward. Shadows seemed to creep in the periphery, and every small sound, a crow cawing, a creaking branch, felt amplified. Sinister. I couldn't tell anyone. Friends would laugh, cops would shrug it off. The motel didn't exist anymore. The fire in room 11 had erased every trace. And yet, when I stayed in hotels afterward, I checked the walls, the vents, the rooms next door. Always. Convincing myself someone, or something, was still there, waiting. Sleep became a battleground. I avoided motels, stopped answering calls. Every time rain hit the windshield, I felt that night pressing down. A weight reminding me that escape is never clean. I started taking longer routes, avoiding interstates. But somehow the road always led me back to small towns, forgotten highways, and empty buildings with histories I wasn't meant to know. Once, in rural Kentucky, I pulled into a diner. Old neon buzzed overhead. I ordered black coffee and stared out at the slick asphalt. A man at the counter mentioned the fire at Redwood Pines casually, as if discussing a sports score. But the details, the names, the rooms made my stomach twist. Robert Hale and Vanessa Cole, he said. Terrible accident. Poor kids. I wanted to tell him I had been there, seen it, felt it, but I swallowed the words. No one would believe me. Even now I check motels from the street. Half glimpses of flickering signs, doors slightly ajar, cracked windows. I drive past quickly, but the hairs on my neck rise anyway. Being seen even briefly changes the rules. It makes the hidden things visible. The more I tried to rationalize, the less sense it made. Rain drumming on windows, flickering lights, whispers through vents. Everything should have been explainable, but it obeyed a cruel, deliberate logic. Room 11 had a story, a weight, a history that refused to let me forget. Months later, curiosity or compulsion drew me back near the old motel in Evansville. Rain had stopped. Nature was reclaiming the building. Faded letters barely spelled out "Red Wind." I walked the perimeter, peering at boarded windows. Nothing stirred. Nothing moved. And yet I could almost hear it. The thud of bodies against walls, whispers behind vents, the laughter of people who no longer existed. Some things don't end when fire, demolition, or time consumes them. They linger in perception, in memory, and fear. Room 11 had left a mark on me that sunlight and distance could not erase. Eventually, I returned to Chicago, forced to confront my life again. I learned to live with fear, to accept it as a passenger in the seat beside me. Trying to outrun the past, the fire, the storm, the night I barely escaped was futile. The lesson wasn't about ghosts or haunted motels. It was about awareness. Some places, some decisions, some people leave impressions you carry forever. Rain still terrifies me. Every darkened room, every vent, every storm drags me back to that night. I've learned to live with it because fear is not the absence of life. It is a reminder that life is fragile, unpredictable, and fleeting. And maybe that's the lesson. Pay attention to your surroundings. Don't ignore danger. Don't ignore instinct. Respect the past because some things, once they touch you, never leave. Life is fragile. The choices we make, the places we go, the people we trust, the details we notice, they leave marks that cannot always be erased. Fear is not punishment, it is signal. And facing it with awareness, respecting both past and present is the only way to keep moving forward. It was September 2015, early fall in Flint, Michigan, when the air carried that crisp tang of rotting leaves and the first whisper of cold. The kind of air that made the city feel smaller, heavier. College life felt like it was pressing in from every direction then. Endless lectures, greasy takeout, and the hum of fluorescent lights that made even the good days feel sterile. I was 20, a sophomore juggling classes, a part-time job, and the faint illusion of a social life. Liam, Harper, and Ethan, my roommates, had been restless for weeks. They wanted something real, something that didn't taste like cheap beer or sound like another argument in the dorm hall. "A story," Liam said one night. "Something to tell when this place is just a blur." And then he found it. Brennan Pines Motel. A shuttered roadside relic from the late 90s, abandoned after a fire gutted half the structure in 2000. The online forums he trawled through were filled with conflicting stories, part ghost tale, part urban exploration myth. Some said it was haunted, others claimed it was condemned and forgotten. It was only 30 minutes from campus, just beyond Flint's rusted industrial sprawl and fields that used to hum with the sound of machinery. By the time we drove up, the night had settled deep and heavy. The air was cool, smelling faintly of damp soil and old smoke. The motel's neon sign still buzzed weakly, flickering in fractured reds and blues, the letters so broken they barely spelled Brennan. The parking lot was cracked and uneven, weeds forcing their way through the concrete like desperate fingers. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the property, warped and bent in places. Liam found a gap near the back. "Seriously, are we doing this?" Harper asked, pulling her jacket tight around her shoulders. Her flashlight shook a little, the beam jittering against the dark. "It's just an empty building," I said, trying to sound casual, though the words came out thinner than I'd intended. Liam grinned, teeth flashing in the half-light. "Exactly, empty. We take a few pictures, tell a few lies about ghosts later, and go home." We slipped through the fence. Inside, the lobby was a tomb. Dust hung in the air like smoke, thick and slow, glittering when our flashlights passed through it. The scent hit us immediately. Mildew, wet carpet, something faintly sweet like decaying flowers. Broken chairs were stacked in the corner, their legs jutting out like broken bones. Papers littered the floor, invoices, guest ledgers from 1998, curling at the edges. "It smells like time died in here," Harper muttered. "Or someone forgot to bury it," Ethan said under his breath. We laughed, too loudly, the sound hollow in the empty space. The quiet afterward felt wrong, the kind that hums in your ears and makes you aware of your own breathing. We climbed the stairwell carefully. Every step groaned beneath us. The catwalks on the second floor were worse, boards missing in places, the drop below a dizzying 40 feet to the lobby. Harper dared us to cross the narrow section near the railing. Liam went first, grinning like a fool, but his foot slipped on the warped wood. The flashlight spun from his hand, clattering toward the edge. My heart lurched, but I caught it just in time. My palms were slick with sweat. Upstairs, the offices looked like something sealed off mid-breath. Rusted filing cabinets, papers scattered like fallen leaves, yellowed Polaroids of guests whose faces had faded into white ghosts. A single computer sat in the corner, its monitor coated in a film of dust. "Creepy as hell," Ethan murmured, sweeping his light down the hall. The beam caught a flicker of movement, a shadow shifting at the far end. He stiffened. "Did you see that?" Before we could answer, a loud crack echoed above us. Liam's foot caught on a tilted board. He pitched sideways with a shout, arms flailing. Instinct took over. I lunged, grabbed his wrist, Harper grabbed mine, and for one terrifying second, he dangled over the empty air before we pulled him back up. And that's when we saw him. A man, maybe in his 50s, wearing a faded security uniform, standing perfectly still on the opposite catwalk watching. His expression was unreadable. His flashlight was dead, yet somehow we could see his eyes in the dark. "Move," I whispered. We did. Slow, deliberate steps, every board creaking like a warning. The man didn't follow, not at first. Then he moved, a few paces closer, just enough for the light to catch the faint shine of his badge. And then just as we reached the door, he gave a single nod, almost approving. Then he was gone. We didn't speak until we were outside, gasping cold air like it might wash something off us. The neon sign buzzed faintly behind us, letters flickering in red and blue as if the motel were breathing, watching. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't left it behind. By mid-October, Brennan Pines still lived in the back of my mind. The creak of wood, The man's eyes. The silence. We went back once more, this time with gloves, better flashlights, and the kind of caution that only comes from surviving something you can't quite explain. Harper insisted she wanted better shots of the lobby. "I didn't get the lighting right last time," she said, adjusting her camera strap with a shaky hand. Ethan was determined to check out the old kitchen. "If the rumors are true, they left everything after the fire," he said, curiosity glinting behind his glasses. Liam, still limping slightly from his bruised ribs, smirked like he had something to prove. "I'm fine. Just don't expect me to do any gymnastics this time." I tagged along, my gut knotted between fascination and dread. The deeper we went, the worse it smelled. Mildew, wet carpet, rust, and something faintly metallic like old blood. The main hallway stretched before us, claustrophobic and echoing. Graffiti crawled across the walls, names, slurs, crude symbols. The carpet was riddled with cigarette burns and water stains that looked like spreading bruises. Some rooms had been gutted, furniture scavenged, wallpaper peeling in long curling strips, shards of glass crunching under our shoes. Others felt eerily preserved. Beds made, curtains still drawn, a half-empty water bottle on a dresser, its plastic cloudy with age. It was too easy to imagine someone sleeping there just yesterday instead of 15 years ago. "Creepy how normal some of this looks," Harper whispered. "Yeah," Ethan said, like time just stopped caring. We kept our voices low, not wanting to startle anything or anyone that might still linger. The building swallowed our whispers, leaving only the sound of our footsteps and the steady drip of water somewhere unseen. It wasn't until we reached the back stairwell that I noticed something wrong. The boards beneath my shoes had a hollow sound, different from before, like something had shifted underneath. Liam stepped ahead, his flashlight sweeping across the dark corridor. That's when a shadow darted past the beam, fast, deliberate. Too quick to be imagined. Ethan's breath hitched. "Did you see that?" "Don't," Harper's voice trembled. She grabbed my arm. "Don't look too long. Just keep moving." We did, inching forward through the silence, pretending not to notice the way our lights seemed weaker now. The shadow was gone, but its absence felt heavier than its presence. The air itself seemed alive, like the motel was exhaling, watching, waiting for one of us to falter. We found ourselves back on the second-floor catwalk, the same place where Liam had nearly fallen weeks before. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, rubbing his shoulder. "Not this again." The boards creaked under every step, groaning like something buried deep in the wood wanted out. That's when I saw him, the man in the faded security uniform. He stood at the far end of the hall, motionless as if he'd been there all along. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could feel his gaze, heavy, focused, like he could see through the skin, through the breath, straight into us. "Do we leave?" I whispered. Harper didn't move. Her camera hung uselessly from her neck, lens pointed at the floor. Liam froze mid-step, every muscle tight. The man didn't speak, didn't blink. My pulse roared in my ears. The boards beneath me flexed with a soft, protesting moan. One wrong shift of weight and they'd give way. I took another careful step, then another. We moved slowly, deliberate, every breath timed with every creak. It felt like walking a tightrope stretched over something unseen and endless. The man stayed where he was until we reached the stairwell. Then he moved. Not forward, but sideways, dissolving into the dark like smoke. By the time our feet hit solid concrete, he was gone. Outside, the cold slapped our faces. We stood in silence, shivering, not just from the wind, but from the understanding that something had seen us in there. The motel loomed behind, its shattered windows glinting faintly in the moonlight like open eyes. Over the following weeks, none of us could stop thinking about Brennan Pines. Every conversation circled back to it. The smell of rot, the creak of the floors, the shadow, the man. We all remembered it the same way. Too vividly. Too consistently. I started to realize that the motel wasn't just a ruin. It was memory made physical, a place built from every mistake, secret, and echo left inside it. We hadn't just trespassed on abandoned property. We'd stepped into a story still being written, and somehow it had noticed. We never went back. The thrill had curdled into something heavier, an awareness that curiosity has teeth. Some places aren't meant to be uncovered. Some stories aren't waiting to be told. Even now, years later, when I pass an empty motel on a desolate road, or hear the wind rattle through broken windows, I feel it again, that quiet, patient presence. And I remember that night in Flint, when we learned that curiosity isn't free. It demands something in return. Sometimes what it takes is a part of you that never quite comes back. I never paid much attention to small towns, until one late November found me driving through one, the Montana sky a flat, unforgiving gray above a road that seemed to stretch forever. The air cut sharply through my jacket, biting my fingers even as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to ignore it. I was Clara Bennett, 23, a graduate student on the verge of finishing my senior thesis, convinced I could handle long stretches of isolation. My mother, naturally, did not share this confidence. She'd called twice before I left Billings, her voice trembling slightly as she insisted I check in with someone while working alone. "Mom, it's just a motel," I said, trying for lightness. "I've stayed alone before. Remember the cabins?" There was a long sigh on the other end. I ignored it. Work waited. Cedar Hollow Motel appeared off the roadside like a relic from a different time. Its neon vacancy sign flickered with uneven pulses, half-burned letters buzzing faintly in the wind. Small, aged and stubbornly standing in the empty stretch of highway, it was exactly the sort of place writers and loners tended to gravitate toward. I parked beside room 7, hoisted my duffel and pushed open the creaky glass door. Henry, the front desk clerk, hunched behind the counter under dim fluorescent lights. His frame was thin, almost fragile, and a faint trace of cigarette smoke clung to him. His smile was polite but rehearsed, like one he had practiced in front of a mirror. "Evening," he said, handing me a brass key. "Room 7, top floor." "Thanks," I murmured, forcing calm. There was something in the way his eyes lingered, an odd heaviness that made my skin crawl. I blamed it on the long drive. Room 7 smelled of mothballs and aged carpet, and the heater rattled in uneven, discordant beats. I set up my laptop, opening my thesis folder, but the silence of the motel pressed in on me, making every creak and groan of the building feel amplified. Around 11:30 p.m., footsteps crunched outside. My chest tightened. I froze, staring through the window. A man stood at the edge of the parking lot, his long coat blending with the dark pines beyond. He didn't move, didn't blink, he just watched. I reached for the phone to call Henry, but the line was dead. My cell signal flickered, barely one bar. Panic crept in, slow and insidious. I backed away from the window, whispering reassurances to myself that it was just someone passing through. But the footsteps returned, slower this time, deliberate, moving toward the lone tree by the motel. The glow of a cigarette illuminated part of his face, pale, expressionless, almost carved from stone. I grabbed the baseball bat from the trunk and sat near the door, waiting. Hours passed. The wind rattled the siding. The heater clanged unevenly, and he never left. When dawn finally bled across the horizon, the footsteps faded. My body trembled as I packed in silence. Henry was gone, and muddy footprints led from the side entrance toward the woods. The lobby phone rang suddenly, its shrill tone slicing the quiet. I answered, breath catching. "Hello?" Silence then, a faint, hollow chuckle that made my stomach flip. I hung up and left without looking back. Weeks later, I discovered that Cedar Hollow Motel carried a long history of trespassers and disappearances. Nobody ever got caught. I tell myself the man was a drifter, a voyeur, but even in my quiet apartment in Billings, I sometimes feel the same unblinking gaze, as if someone is lingering just beyond the window. Watching, I return to Cedar Hollow only in nightmares. The memory of his stare haunted me. The crunch of gravel, the cigarette's pale glow, the faint mocking chuckle. I couldn't explain why the memory clawed at me, but the more I tried to ignore it, the sharper it became. A few weeks later, I had to return for another research trip. Rationally, daylight should have made the motel safe, but unease returned the moment I walked in. Henry was there, but his smile seemed tighter now, more controlled. He handed me the key silently, eyes lingering just a moment too long. That night, I unpacked my laptop and tried to focus on work. But by 10 p.m., the wind had picked up, rattling the window frames like tiny warning bells. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside room 7. Slow, deliberate, dragging across the thin carpet. My pulse kicked up, quick and shallow. I pressed an ear to the door, straining to listen. The sound stopped. Holding my breath, I leaned toward the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the fluorescent light above flickering with a weak, intermittent buzz. "Get a grip, Clara," I muttered to myself, forcing a shaky laugh as I turned back toward my desk. I tried to focus on my laptop screen, but the heater's uneven clank and the groan of the floorboards made every second feel louder, heavier. Then the footsteps came again, closer this time. They stopped right outside my door. My throat tightened. I grabbed the baseball bat from beside the bed, fingers slick with sweat. A knock. 3 soft, deliberate taps. "Hello," I called, barely above a whisper. "Who's there?" No answer. The knocking resumed, slow, patient, as if whoever was out there had all the time in the world. I backed away, the bat trembling in my grip. I didn't sleep that night. My muscles locked tight, every sound magnified, the wind whispering under the door. The heater clanging like distant footsteps, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Something inside me screamed that I was not alone. By morning, silence. The hallway empty again. Only a small smear of mud marked the bottom of my door. Henry wasn't at the front desk. I didn't even bother checking out. I just left, hands trembling on the steering wheel, the feeling of being hunted clinging to my skin. Even back in the crowded streets of Billings, that sense of being watched wouldn't fade. Sometimes when I heard footsteps behind me, I'd quicken my pace, pulse spiking until I saw no one there. Months passed. I moved into a larger apartment with stronger locks, better lighting, and neighbors on both sides. I promised myself never to travel alone again. I told everyone Cedar Hollow was just a bad dream. Then one evening, an email arrived. "You saw me. I saw you. Don't forget." My blood ran cold. The sender was a burner account. No name, no traceable address, nothing. I told myself it was a sick joke. Maybe some troll who found my name online. But the memory of that pale face in the dark parking lot came rushing back. The unblinking stare, the cigarette glow, the stillness. A week later, working late in the campus library, I felt it again. The unmistakable prickle of eyes on me. My pulse quickened. Every shadow in the corner of my vision seemed to twitch, stretch, move. I turned toward the window, and for a split second I swore I saw a silhouette standing outside. I blinked. It was gone. Sleep became a stranger after that. I started checking the locks twice, leaving lights on through the night, avoiding empty rooms and quiet corridors. Even in crowds I could feel it, the weight of a gaze that didn't belong. Finally, 6 months later, I decided to go back. I told myself I needed closure. That fear could only control me if I let it. Cedar Hollow waited, unchanged. The same flickering neon sign, the same heavy silence pressing against the glass. Henry stood behind the counter again, his expression blank. When I asked about room 7, his lips twitched into something almost like a smirk. "No one stayed there in months," he said quietly. "Most people avoid it." "I'd like to see it," I said before I could lose my nerve. The door creaked as I stepped inside. The air smelled exactly as I remembered. Old carpet, mothballs, faint cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains. I crossed to the window and looked out into the dark parking lot. Nothing moved. The silence felt heavier than before. Then something shifted at the edge of the tree line, a flicker of movement. My heart skipped. A whisper brushed through the room, low and cold, curling around my ear. "You can't run." I spun around. Empty space. Just the faint hum of the heater. My breath came fast, my palms slick against the bat I hadn't realized I'd picked up. Standing there, surrounded by the ghosts of my own fear, I realized something. Whatever haunted me might not live in the motel anymore. It lived in me. Still, the instinct to flee was overpowering. I bolted, driving away faster than I ever had before, headlights slicing through the gray dawn. I never went back. Cedar Hollow became a scar in my memory, a lesson written in dread and adrenaline. Back in Billings, I forced myself to rebuild. I finished my thesis, found a steady job, made myself believe in normal again. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind rattles the window and the shadows stretch too long across the room, I feel it, the faint chill of eyes on my back. That's when I understand. Fear isn't weakness, it's warning. We like to believe we can reason our way out of danger, out of instinct. But the mind is both protector and betrayer. Cedar Hollow taught me that vigilance isn't paranoia, It's survival. The world isn't always cruel, but it's never as empty as it seems. I remember that heavy, airless March afternoon in Kerala, as if it were pressed into my memory with heat and sweat. I was 15 then, Oliver Hughes, a lanky British kid on his first real trip abroad. The bus had just hissed to a stop, brakes groaning, and our little group of exchange students stumbled out into the thick green quiet. The jungle pressed in from all sides, swallowing sound and color until even the road behind us seemed to fade away. Mr. Varma, our guide, waved us toward a place he called the Jungle Edge Motel. I'd imagined something quaint, a rustic rest stop with carved shutters and the smell of spiced tea. But when we saw it, my stomach tightened. The motel crouched behind overgrown vines, half smothered by the forest. Its paint was the color of rot, windows cracked like spiderwebs. The sign above the porch swung with every sluggish gust of wind, letting out a thin, high-pitched squeal that made my teeth ache. No other travelers. No parked vehicles. Just silence. The staff appeared slowly, as if conjured by our arrival. Pale faces, quiet feet, their eyes strangely dull and watchful. They moved with a stiffness that made conversation feel unwelcome. The man who greeted us, tall and angular with a hooked nose and eyes sharp as obsidian, didn't smile. He merely handed out room keys one by one, murmuring numbers in a voice too soft to carry. When I entered my room, the air changed. Even in that oppressive heat, the space felt cold, almost airless. It was barren, just a single narrow bed, a scuffed nightstand, and a dull mirror that warped my reflection. On the dresser sat a small metal horse polished to a glassy sheen. Its head was tilted slightly, as if caught mid-turn. For reasons I couldn't explain, I couldn't stop looking at it. It seemed aware. The room smelled faintly of damp and mildew, and the bathroom tiles were cracked and gray with age. I unpacked to keep busy, scribbled a few sentences in my journal, something about new sights, odd energy, and lay down. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak from the floorboards, every sigh of wind through the shutters set my nerves on edge. My gaze kept flicking to the figurine, waiting for it to twitch. At 1:15 a.m., I woke to a soft click, the sound of my door latch moving. My breath caught. Someone had opened it. I sat up slowly, listening. Nothing. But the air felt disturbed, alive. My luggage, neatly zipped earlier, had been shifted. Nothing missing, but someone had touched it. My eyes darted toward the dresser. The horse was no longer facing the mirror. It had turned, now staring directly at the door. A prickling chill spread through my skin. "Hello?" I whispered, but my voice broke in the stillness. No answer. I thought about knocking on the adjoining wall, calling out to the others, but fear rooted me in place. The jungle hummed outside. Somewhere in the darkness, something moved. When dawn finally came, the unease didn't lift. Over breakfast, flat chapati and bitter coffee, the group was quieter than usual. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Then I saw it. In the lounge near the back porch, several pieces of furniture had been reduced to blackened splinters, the floor streaked with ash. Mr. Varma frowned but said nothing. Our driver, Raju, refused to eat. "Funny business here," he muttered, shaking his head, his hands trembling slightly. "Bad place." I tried to laugh, but my voice sounded wrong. I opened my travel folder to check my documents just to reassure myself and froze. One of my passport photos was gone. I flipped the pages again, frantic. Gone. It hadn't fallen out. I knew it hadn't. My stomach turned cold. Someone had been in my room. Someone who knew exactly what they were taking. By afternoon, the front desk was empty. Doors locked, lights flickering. The staff had vanished, though I caught glimpses of movement deep in the corridor, like shapes dissolving just as I turned my head. My fellow travelers grew uneasy too. Some whispered, others stared at the floor. Mr. Varma tried to sound calm, but I saw his hands twitch whenever the shadows shifted. He kept glancing toward the tree line as if expecting the forest itself to step closer. We began comparing notes over breakfast, each of us quietly testing the line between coincidence and something else. Harper from the next room mentioned hearing a whisper in the hallway. Soft, rhythmic, almost like chanting. Mr. Varma's nephew swore his door had creaked open in the night, though the latch was heavy. Someone else said they'd seen movement just beyond the edge of their vision, shapes that vanished when they turned their heads. No one laughed. No one said we were imagining it. The air itself felt complicit, thick with something unspoken and deliberate. By late afternoon, the tension had become suffocating. I sat in my room pretending to do homework, pencil scratching across a blank page, my thoughts circling like trapped flies. Every noise outside, rustling leaves, snapping branches, the faint rhythm of footsteps that may not have been there, made my pulse surge. I couldn't escape the feeling that eyes were fixed on me from somewhere unseen. I finally stepped out to the back porch, desperate for air. That's when I saw it. The metal horse. The same figurine from my dresser now sat at the porch's edge, gleaming faintly in the wan sunlight, facing outward toward the jungle. Its position was too precise to be an accident. The sight hit me like a stone dropped into my stomach. Someone had moved it there. Someone wanted us to see it. The message was unmistakable. We see you. We control this place. I forced a nervous laugh, telling myself it must be a prank, some local ritual, something explainable. But the logic crumbled under the weight of my own dread. My instinct screamed that it was a warning. I clutched my phone like a lifeline, though the screen flickered weakly. No signal. When I asked Raju to call for help, he refused, eyes darting toward the tree line. "Better not," he said, voice low. "They don't like noise here." After that, the hallways felt different. Longer somehow, darker. Every doorway seemed to breathe. By nightfall, sleep was impossible. My imagination turned the ordinary into threats. The hiss of wind through cracked windows became whispers, the creak of my bed a cautious step, the fluttering curtains a hand reaching toward me. I lay frozen, muscles trembling, praying for dawn. When morning finally bled into the gray air, our decision came without words. We were done. Mr. Varma gathered us, and together we marched to the reception desk, prepared to demand answers. But the front office was padlocked. No sign of the staff. No sound but the jungle beyond. And there, in front of the door, sat the metal horse again, its metal surface catching the light, positioned just so, facing the road as though standing guard. I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't random. It was ritualistic. Someone wanted us gone. Fear finally broke through hesitation. "We're leaving," Mr. Varma said flatly, voice trembling. No one argued. We fled down the narrow jungle path, branches clawing at our arms, the sound of our hurried breaths blending with the cicadas' drone. Sweat slicked our backs despite the heat. Behind us, the jungle edge motel stood silent, half consumed by vines, an empty shell with eyes we could no longer see. I didn't look back. None of us did. For hours, as we drove toward civilization, I replayed everything in my head. The whispering halls, the burned furniture, the shifting luggage, the missing passport photo. All of it. Slowly, the pattern formed. It hadn't been random. We had wandered into someone's quiet, patient game, a trap for the curious. Back home in England, I tried to bury the memory, but it followed me. For years afterward, every creak of a floorboard, every door that clicked shut on its own made my skin crawl. I'd wake in the dark certain that something was standing just beyond the edge of sight watching. The memory of the motel had turned to a ghost that traveled with me. The metal horse became its symbol, a silent sentinel reminding me of the invisible lines we cross without meaning to. The experience taught me that not all dangers roar or reveal themselves. Some simply wait. Curiosity is a powerful instinct, but unchecked, it's perilous. The world is full of quiet predators, people, places, forces that observe, patient and unseen. I learned painfully that respect and awareness protect more than fear ever could. Silence, I realized, isn't always peace. Sometimes it's the sound of something watching you breathe.